Well, let's kick things off with some transfer portal news. It's a different day and age in college football these days. There were over 4,000 players that entered the transfer portal within just the first few days of it being open. So definitely not your dad's college football. 3 of the top 4 portal quarterbacks have already committed elsewhere. And Drew Mestemaker, who is the number 5 overall prospect, the number 2 quarterback in the portal, going from North Texas to Oklahoma State, following his head coach, Eric Morris. He comfortably led the FBS in passing yards with 4,379. No other quarterback even eclipsed 4,000. Then you have Brennan Sorsby, the number 7 overall player and the number 3 quarterback, going from Cincinnati to Texas Tech. So he's staying in the Big 12. He has accounted for over 6,600 total yards and 63 total touchdowns over the last 2 years at Cincinnati. And then Byron Brown, who is the number 12 overall player and the 5th rated quarterback in the portal, following his head coach, Alex Golesh, from USF to Auburn. He was a 3-year starter at USF, threw for over 3,100 yards and 28 touchdowns this year. Also added another 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns on the ground. Braden, what do you expect from each of these 3 guys at their new school, and who do you think will be the most impactful next year on their new team?
Yeah, with Drew Mestemaker first, I think what he's going to do is lay some great groundwork for this Oklahoma State program. They've been really in a terrible spot the last couple of years. The end of the Mike Gundy era was not kind to Oklahoma State football. Eric Morris is an excellent hire. As predicted, he brings over a ton of guys from North Texas. They also have, I think it's Caleb Hawkins, right, the running back?
Correct.
Yeah, he was one of the best running backs in the country this year. I think he's a true freshman as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they get both parts of that backfield back. I think those 2 are going to be extremely exciting. I'm not sure if Oklahoma State is going to put up, a bowl appearance next year. I'm going to pull up their schedule real quick. I guess the schedule's not out yet, but they play, let's see, Oregon, that's a loss. Tulsa and Murray State should win those. And then, I don't know what their Big 12 opponents are. Okay, so they play at Iowa State, Houston, Arizona State, Kansas State. Probably 4 losses on that schedule. Maybe they beat Kansas State. At home, it's fairly easy. They have Texas Tech as the only tough opponent. So I could maybe see a 4 to 5 win season for Oklahoma State. Possibly they get to 6. It's not out of the question. But regardless, this team is going to be much improved. I would expect them to be competitive in the vast majority of games, which we have not seen recently out of this Oklahoma State football program. So I think Mestemaker is a great addition to Oklahoma State. With Brennan Sorsby, obviously Texas Tech brings him in, expecting him to be an improvement or at the very least a lateral move from Baron Morton. I'm curious to see if Will Hammond sticks around. He played pretty well when Morton was hurt earlier this year before tearing his ACL. I believe he's still on the roster right now. I don't think he's under the portal. Sorsby, obviously you mentioned, he was great at Cincinnati, was at Indiana before that for a couple of years. I think had 1 year where he started most of the season as a sophomore in 2023. I don't know if he's an elite quarterback. Maybe he can develop that in the offseason. Had a very good season, at least statistically, for the Bearcats this year. And obviously that's why he's getting brought in. But at the same time, I don't know if he's the guy that gets Texas Tech over the hump or not. It kind of depends on the rest of the roster around him. And I think if they have a similar roster to this year, I think they'll have a similar result. If they can improve a little bit more, especially on the offensive side of the ball. We already saw the defense was phenomenal last year. I think there's a chance they could win the national championship at that point. And then finally with Byron Brown, I think he is the biggest difference maker out of these 3 quarterbacks. I think he's going to elevate this Auburn program in a way that Jackson Arnold was supposed to and didn't. I would expect him to continue to put up the stats that we saw at South Florida. Maybe not quite to that extent, because I think the offensive scheme that Golesh ran there is going to have to be adjusted a little bit for SEC defenses compared to the American Conference defenses. Like even in USF's one SEC opponent this year, they played my Florida Gators. Obviously they beat us, but the offense wasn't phenomenal for South Florida for most of that game. I would expect less in terms of stats, but a great impact. I think Auburn's going to be going bowling next year, and I wouldn't be shocked if they win 7 or 8 games.
I'm glad you said that, because I had it the complete opposite way. I think Byron Brown is going to be the least impactful of the 3. I think Sorsby is going to be the most impactful in terms of what he can do for Texas Tech, just because I think he's probably the most talented of the 3 at this point. I don't know that the pieces are necessarily there for him in Cincinnati to succeed as well as they will be in Texas Tech. with all that oil money they've got. So I think Brennan Sorsby, with what we've seen from Cincinnati and a little bit at Indiana, is going to be, the best of the three this coming year. But I think as far as, an upgrade and difference maker goes, I think it's going to be Drew Mestemaker. You mentioned they probably won't be, a 7-8 win team, but I think this is an Oklahoma team that is going to take a lot of steps forward and come next season. This was the worst Power 4 team in the country, winning one single game and losing their other 11. So I think getting Drew Mestemaker, you mentioned Caleb Hawkins as well. They've added some other pieces in there, but I think this Oklahoma State offense is going to take some serious steps forward. And I think that Drew Mestemaker probably will take some steps back. I mean, it's going to be hard to repeat 4,400 yards and 34 passing touchdowns in the Power 4 level. But I think this guy is talented enough to the point where this offense is going to click. And it might just come down to the defense at that point, because I think this offense has shown that they're legit and they can hang with Power 4 competition. So I'm very, very curious to see how that jump goes from North Texas to Oklahoma State at the Power 4 level. Along with those three guys, there is also Josh Hoover, who was a multi-year starter at TCU. He is transferring to Indiana to presumably replace Fernando Mendoza. He is the 7th rated quarterback in the transfer portal. Then you have Iowa State's Rocco Becht, who is transferring to Penn State following his head coach, Matt Campbell. He was a 3-year starter for the Cyclones, and I believe he had 34 wins, maybe, something like that. That sounded a little high. But I know he has the most wins of any starting quarterback in college football right now. There's also a handful of uncommitted quarterbacks, including the number 1 overall prospect in the portal, and Sam Levitt, who was a multi-year starter at Arizona State. Also got Dylan Raiola, a former 5-star at Nebraska for the last 2 seasons. He's the number 6 portal quarterback. And then there's some names like Florida's DJ Lagway, Auburn's Deuce Knight, Missouri's Bo Pribula that are still undecided. And as of last night, you have to add in Washington's DeMond Williams to that list. Now, there are some serious legal complications going on, and Braden, you are definitely more well-suited than me to comment on that. But if DeMond Williams were to go somewhere, Braden, let's start with him because we're on the topic already. If DeMond Williams were to leave Washington, despite all the legal things, where do you think he goes?
I think the only option is LSU. That's the only thing that's been reported, really. And it feels very on brand for Lane Kiffin to try to get in the way of a guy who re-signed with his program 4 days ago. But welcome to college football in 2026. If DeMond Williams does go to LSU, he's certainly an upgrade over Garrett Nussmeier, at least from what we saw from Nussmeier last year. But at the same time, I don't know if he's an elite college quarterback. I think he's a good college quarterback. I would say he's definitely a top 15 to 20 college quarterback. But at the same time, I don't know if he elevates this LSU program to a national championship contender. And maybe that's not what they're going for in year 1 under Kiffin. They obviously do have quite a bit to figure out after a couple of down seasons under Brian Kelly. But if he does go there, it would still be a solid pickup, I would say, for LSU. As for the legal side of things, the language of the contract is very weird. I don't know if this is a common thing because I haven't seen a ton of these contracts with players re-signing with schools. I took one singular NIL class for a week on this, so I'm very ill-equipped compared to a lot of lawyers, or I guess other people in the field, to maybe comment on this. But having the buyout being in the sole discretion of Washington is very interesting. I feel like his agent should have pressed harder to get a specific number, because that could potentially, leave LSU or DeMond Williams, whoever is footing that bill, on the hook for 8 figures. So when you factor in what LSU is going to be paying DeMond Williams directly, there's a chance they're paying $15 to $20 million for a college quarterback that's probably not a Heisman contender. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole situation is nuts. I don't think we've really seen anything like this to this point in the transfer portal. But yeah, I was going to say LSU as well. I think the rumor came out last night that that's the one who first contacted DeMond Williams, because he entered with a do not contact tag. So presumably when you do that, you have a general idea of where you're going. But there have been some other quarterbacks linked to LSU as well. So maybe it's DeMond Williams, maybe it's not. But it's either way going to be a very fascinating situation to see how that all plays out with Washington and DeMond Williams, if he stays or if he goes. But moving on from him, I mentioned the number 1 overall portal prospect is quarterback Sam Levitt. Braden, where do you think he ends up?
I think Sam Levitt ends up at Oregon. He's been taking a ton of visits to a bunch of different schools. He was at Texas Tech, Tennessee, and LSU all within the last, I think, week and a half-ish, maybe even within the last week. There was rumors about him going to Kentucky before they ended up getting Kenny Minchie. It kind of just seems like he's buying time until Dante Moore declares for the draft. Or I guess Dante Moore theoretically could go back to Oregon next year, which is unlikely. I think that's why Levitt hasn't committed yet. I think he's just wanting to make sure that Moore doesn't decide to go back to school and then all of a sudden there's a mess there. But I would expect him to end up with the Ducks. With Dylan Raiola, I've seen Tennessee, and I think that's probably the most likely destination for him. He's probably the biggest wild card out of these other quarterbacks, with the exception of Prbula for me. There's probably a couple of other landing spots he could go, but I feel like Tennessee is the one that makes the most sense for both sides. For DJ Lagway, I would expect him to go to Baylor. He definitely needs to drop down a step from the SEC. I think the Big 12 would be a good spot for him. Baylor obviously has had some success with Sawyer Robertson over the last couple of years, and I think that'd be a good scheme for him. The question is, how long is Dave Aranda going to be the Baylor head coach? He was on the hot seat going into last year. Obviously was able to survive it somehow. I don't really know how, because they weren't a very good team this last year, especially not on the defensive side of the ball, which is supposed to be his specialty. But regardless, I think he'll go to Baylor for at least 1 year. Deuce Knight, it seems like he's pretty much locked into Ole Miss to be Trinidad Chambliss' successor, whether that's either next year or the year after, which seems probably most likely. I would expect Chambliss to win his plea, or I guess lawsuit, if he ends up filing one, against the NCAA for another year of eligibility due to a medical red shirt. And then finally with Bo Prbula, I was thinking he'd go to Nebraska, and then they brought in Anthony Colandrea. I think was it last night or 2 nights ago?
I think last night.
Yes, that was my initial thought. Now I'm going to say he goes to Washington. It was just reported within the last 10 minutes that they were hosting him. And with Damon Williams seemingly on the move, I think that makes sense for both sides. I also could have seen Virginia Tech, but they obviously went with Ethan Grunkemeyer, another Penn State guy, or another former Penn State guy. So Prbula is kind of a wild card. I think Washington makes sense for him, and he'd be a good fit because he kind of has a similar-ish play style to Williams in terms of being a dual threat guy. So good pickup for the Huskies if they can bring him in and kind of do some damage control.
Yeah, and we have all but one of the same projected destinations. I have Levitt to Oregon as well. I think everything you said makes sense in the terms of, Dante Moore could very well go to the NFL. He's a projected top 5 pick at the moment. And we've seen Dan Lanning and Oregon have success with these transfer quarterbacks. This would be their 4th straight starting transfer quarterback, with Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, then Dante Moore, and presumably then Sam Levitt. Damon Williams, we already said LSU. Dylan Raiola, I've been a very firm believer since October that he would wind up in Tennessee. He can make all the throws. He's got a very good completion percentage. I think roughly 70% in his time at Nebraska over these 2 years. He's very good in a play-action style offense that Tennessee runs. He's got a good deep ball, so it feels like he could be a potentially more polished version of Joey Aguilar. With DJ Lagway, I also said Baylor. Sawyer Robertson, their starting quarterback, is gone. Their backup, Walker White, is already entering the portal. And he's from 2 hours away from Waco, Texas. So fit-wise and sticking to home-wise, it would make a lot of sense. Deuce Knight, I've got very little to add. I've got Ole Miss as well. They were very involved in his recruitment out of high school, and I don't know how much Lane Kiffin leaving has an impact on that. But if it's not Ole Miss, I think LSU would make a ton of sense as well for Deuce Knight. He fits that Lane Kiffin style offense perfectly. So that would be my backup plan for Deuce Knight. And then Bo Prbula was the only one I had a different answer for. And it was just Virginia Tech, because obviously James Franklin, his former coach at Penn State, and then he transfers to Mizzou. So I could see that reuniting. But Washington certainly would be a good option as well. I jotted this down before the Damon Williams news. So I could very, very easily see him going to Washington to replace Damon Williams. I think that'd be a very good fit. And then very quickly running through some other big names in the transfer portal. I'm not going to say where we think they end up or anything, just going to run through them here quick. You have Auburn wide receiver Cam Coleman, who is the number 2 overall prospect in the portal. Former 5-star, 93 catches for over 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns in 2 seasons at Auburn. You have a trio of edge rushers inside the top 10 overall prospects. You have Chaz Coleman, who was a freshman this year at Penn State. Ohio State is the heavy favorite for him at the moment. Then you have Damon Wilson, who transferred from Georgia to Missouri this past year and had 9 sacks with Mizzou in 2025. And you have Utah's John Henry Daly, who had 11 and a half sacks as a redshirt sophomore this past year for Utah. Those three, respectively, are the number 3, 4, and 8 overall prospects in the transfer portal. The top offensive lineman is North Carolina State's Jacarius Peak. He's the 6th overall player. And then for our Gopher fans, you have Coy Parrish, who is the 14th overall player. There was talks of him early being linked to Ohio State, just obviously staying in the Big Ten. But he has a visit lined up tomorrow for Texas Tech, and they are the current crystal ball prediction according to On3. So if he were to leave the Gophers, I think Texas Tech is currently trending in the right direction for that. Before we wrap up the transfer portal talk, we each have a winner and a loser so far from the early stages of the transfer portal. And Braden, I'll let you get us started with your transfer portal winner.
My winner from the portal is going to be Ole Miss. And they're a winner in the sense that they've retained their two most important players, more so in terms of that rather than the additions part of things. Trinidad Chambliss at quarterback and Kwan Lacey at running back are both back in Oxford for 2026. They both already signed new contracts. Both were pretty huge targets and felt like they were almost certainly going to be at LSU following Lane Kiffin. But after Ole Miss wins both of their first two playoff games, the transfer portal window is essentially very limited for those guys. If they beat Miami, it's basically they're going to be playing the national championship or you transfer. You don't really have really much of a chance, if any, to do both, I don't think. The Rebels also did make some good pickups in the portal. Makai Boyro was excellent on the interior defensive line for Florida this last year. Karius Kern started 5 games at LSU. He was ranked as the number 1 offensive tackle in the portal. And then Jake Crawford started 10 games at Auburn last year at corner, had 4 PBUs and an interception. All 3 of those guys are excellent pickups for the Rebels. And their only portal loss so far is quarterback Austin Simmons, who I do think is a loss because I do believe in his talent a lot. But at the same time, you have Trinidad Chambliss, who's obviously going to continue starting over Simmons. And Simmons has been on the bench for the last, 2.5 months. So it's not a massive blow, especially if they get Deuce Knight to replace him. I was pretty skeptical of how the Pete Golding era was going to go at Ole Miss. But after 2 college football playoff wins and 1 really encouraging early portal cycle, I'm starting to buy in a little bit on his potential as a head coach.
Yeah, and I think Ole Miss is just a winner of, the past 2-3 weeks in general. I mean, to win 2 playoff games is remarkable without your head coach from the start of the year. Clearly, all of the guys at Ole Miss have bought into Pete Golding and have bought into Ole Miss. So the fact that there has not been more talk of guys going to LSU, I think is outstanding for the program. And Pete Golding has been doing an absolutely fantastic job, having knocked off Georgia last weekend and beating the crap out of Tulane again. So great to see for Ole Miss. My winner, I think Oklahoma State is the clear winner thus far, but I'm not counting them because a lot of that is just Eric Morris leaving and bringing his players with them. I think Texas Tech is a great winner as well, but I'm going to go with Indiana. As good as they are not a powerhouse when it comes to recruiting kids out of high school. They've got a handful of 4-stars in their 2026 class, but it's still ranked only 34th in the country. Curt Cignetti understands what today's college football is and what it looks like, and he works the portal maybe better than any other coach in the country. This past year, they added guys like Fernando Mendoza, Roman Hemby, Riley Nowakowski, and Lewis Moore, all of whom have had massive roles for the Hoosiers this year. And so far this January, they've added Josh Hoover, who we mentioned is likely their QB replacement for Fernando Mendoza. They added Michigan State wide receiver Nick Marsh, who is the 3rd-ranked wide receiver in the portal. They added Kansas State edge Toby Usansomni. I definitely butchered that, but he had 4 sacks in 6 games this year. He's the 8th-ranked edge in the portal. You had Boston College running back Turbo Richard, which Turbo is a sick name for a running back, I just have to say. He ran for 750 yards this year with Boston College. They added a handful of others as well. To some extent, like seeing what Indiana has done these last couple of years with Curt Cignetti, who the hell wouldn't want to go there and play for that guy? I mean, it's not fair to expect them to have this level of success every single year, but Curt Cignetti has Indiana as the national title favorite this year and probably will stay somewhere close to that conversation for several years to come.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head with where I was going to go with this. I especially think that Nick Marsh is a great pickup. For me, I think he's arguably the number 2 receiver in the portal, if not the number 1, even over Cam Coleman. He has been phenomenal at Michigan State, and I would expect him to be a 1st-round pick in next year's NFL draft. I don't think he surpasses Jeremiah Smith, but I think he could be the number 2 receiver off the board. Absolutely. Josh Hoover, I'm a little bit less sold on. He's had some flashes at TCU where he looks great. He's had some stretches where he looks a little bit inconsistent. Obviously, if anybody's going to get a consistent stretch of great play out of him, it's going to be Kurt Signetti and the rest of the Indiana Hoosiers coaching staff. I trust them. I think they know what they're doing. So overall, it's been a great portal cycle once again for Indiana. I think next year they're probably going to be worse. Obviously you lose the Heisman winner in Fernando Mendoza at quarterback. You're going to take a step back naturally, but I don't think they're going to drop out of the college football playoff conversation. I think they're going to be pretty squarely in contention once again.
Well, on the flip side of this conversation, Braden, who do you think is the biggest loser so far, or one of the biggest losers from the portal thus far?
I'm going to go with Nebraska as my big loser. They lost 16 players to the portal. A lot of them are fairly inconsequential, but they did lose Dylan Raiola at quarterback, obviously. They also lost cornerback Malcolm Hartzog, who started 32 games and had 8 interceptions. And they lost edge rusher Keanu Davis, who made 11 starts, had 32 tackles, and 1.5 sacks this past year. Those 3 losses, they absolutely hurt. They aren't crippling for Nebraska, but I think they've also really just lost in terms of whiffing on some key portal targets. Big one is Kenny Minchey at quarterback. He transferred in from Notre Dame for less than 24 hours and then flipped over to Kentucky as it seemed like Sam Leavitt was going elsewhere. Next, they had a visit lined up with San Diego State defensive lineman Ryan Henderson, another pretty big portal target for them. He decided to cancel his visit like right after that, and things really haven't been great in Huskerland. Their additions are okay. They're not exactly needle movers. I think offensive lineman Brendan Black is a good pickup from Iowa State, and I like their linebacker additions of Will Hawthorne, Dexter Foster, and Owen Chambliss. I'm not really sold on Anthony Colandrea at quarterback. He was kind of up and down at Virginia, had a good year at UNLV, but that system is just so weird and kind of video game-esque under Dan Mullen, where it's hard to tell, who's real and who's not in that system. And I will finish this off with a lengthy quote from friend of the show and Nebraska fan Jack Francel. Here, and I quote, "Basically, my thoughts are Nebraska needs game changers, and they haven't picked up any. Rule repeatedly said they have the funds to compete with anyone in the country, yet they are whiffing on guys and get embarrassed on the national stage by Kenny Minchey signing with Kentucky instead. A few decent pickups in Brendan Black, multi-year starter from Iowa State, Tree Babaldi from South Carolina, and Owen Chambliss from San Diego State, where our coordinator came from, but no game changers that will elevate their roster over the hump. No one to replace Raiola, and their options look slim. Can't even come close to replacing Emmett Johnson, and their D-line is still a huge weakness. They have one of the youngest rosters in the country, but thus far Rule and his staff haven't proven to develop players at Nebraska. Pivotal couple of weeks for him, going into a daunting 2026 schedule."
Well said, Mr. Francel. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. You lose Dylan Raiola on top of it, your starting quarterback. I mean, he was a guy who could have potentially been a program changer for Matt Rule in Nebraska. So to lose him after 2 years of, I shouldn't say mediocrity, but that's kind of what it was at the end of the day for Nebraska. So disappointing for them for sure. I don't mind that pick at all. I'm going to go with NC State. They have not lost a ton of guys, and this was a team that won 8 games last year. Not bad at all. But the guys that you have lost have all been serious impact players. 3 of the top 29 players in the portal currently reside from the Wolfpack. I mentioned offensive tackle Jacarius Peak. He's the number one offensive lineman in the portal, 6th overall. There's also the number 2 running back in the portal in Hollywood Smothers, who just committed to my Crimson Tide, actually. So shout out Hollywood. And as well as the team's leading receiver and 4th-ranked portal wide receiver in Terrell Anderson, who committed to USC. Assuming they don't get Jacarius Peak back, that is 3 very, very big losses. They did land Buffalo wide receiver transfer Victor Snow, who had 815 yards this year. But going from Buffalo to the Big Ten as a 5'8" wide receiver, that doesn't necessarily sound like the best recipe for success. I think he's still plenty talented, and he could have a massive role. Could be a Wan'Dale Robinson type player for Nebraska. But all in all, those are 3 huge losses for a team that will be losing a total of 13 starters from this past season.
Yeah, and in addition to the 3 guys you mentioned as the big losses for North Carolina State, they have 18 total transfers, and according to 247 sports, including those three. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys ranked as 4-star transfer portal prospects. Not a great sign, especially when none of the guys you're bringing in, I guess they brought in 2 so far. Both those guys are rated as 3 stars. I do like Victor Snow. I think Jamarian McCrimmon from East Carolina is a solid pickup as well on the offensive line. But regardless, North Carolina State is in for a rough stretch next year, and I'm blanking on their head coach, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's potentially on the hot seat coming up.
Yeah, and I think I forgot to mention, but their current class, their high school recruiting class, is I think 62nd in the country. So to lose, like you said, 16 guys, I didn't even realize it was that many. But 16 guys, 6 of them were 4 stars, like you said, and 3 of the top 29 in the portal. That could mean some bad things potentially for NC State next year. So we shall see.